Stages of development. Sullivan postulated 7 epochs or stages of development, each crucial to the formation of human personality. The thread of interpersonal relations runs throughout the stages. Other people are indispensable to a person's development from infancy to mature adulthood. Personality change can take place at any time, but it is most likely to occur during the transition from one stage to the next. In fact, these threshold periods are more crucial than the stages themselves. Experiences previously dissociated or selectively inattended may enter into the self-system during one of the transitional periods. Sullivan hypothesized that, as one passes over one of these more or less determinable thresholds of a developmental era, everything that has gone before becomes reasonably open to influence. His 7 stages are infancy, childhood, the juvenile era, pre-adolescence, early adolescence, late adolescence, and adulthood. Infancy. Infancy begins at birth and continues until a child develops articulate or syntaxic speech, usually at about age 18 to 24 months. Sullivan believed that an infant becomes human through tenderness received from the mothering one. The satisfaction of nearly every human need demands the cooperation of another person. Infants cannot survive without a mothering one to provide food, shelter, moderate temperature, physical contact, and the cleansing of waste materials. The emphatic linkage between mother and infant leads inexorably to the development of anxiety for the baby. Being human, the mother enters the relationship with some degree of previously learned anxiety. Her anxiety may spring from any one of a variety of experiences, but the infant's first anxiety is always associated with the nursing situation and the oral zone. Unlike that of the mother, the infant's repertory of behaviors is not adequate to handle anxiety. So, whenever infants feel anxious, a condition originally transmitted to it by the mother, they try whatever means available to reduce anxiety. These attempts typically include rejecting the nipple, but this neither reduces anxiety nor satisfies the need for food. An infant's rejection of the nipple, of course, is not responsible for the mother's original anxiety but now adds to it. Eventually the infant discriminates between the good nipple and the bad nipple, the former being associated with relative euphoria in the feeding process, the latter, with enduring anxiety. An infant expresses both anxiety and hunger through crying. The mothering one may mistake anxiety for hunger and force the nipple onto an anxious, but not hungry, infant. The opposite situation may also take place when a mother, for whatever reason, fails to satisfy the baby's needs. The baby then will experience rage, which increases the mother's anxiety and interferes with her ability to cooperate with her baby. With mounting tension, the infant loses the capacity to receive satisfaction, but the need for food, of course, continues to increase. Finally, as tension approaches terror, the infant experiences difficulty with breathing. The baby may even stop breathing and turn a bluish color, but the built-in protections of apathy and somnolent detachment keep the infant from death. Apathy and somnolent detachment allow the infant to fall asleep despite the hunger. During the feeding process, the infant not only receives food but also satisfies some tenderness needs. The tenderness received by the infant at this time demands the cooperation of the mothering one and introduces the infant to the various strategies required by the interpersonal situation. The mother-infant relationship, however, is like a two-sided coin. The infant develops a dual personification of mother, seeing her as both good and bad. The mother is good when she satisfies the baby's needs and bad when she stimulates anxiety. Around mid-infancy, infants begin to learn how to communicate through language. In the beginning, their language is not consensually validated but takes place on an individualized or parataxic level. This period of infancy is characterized by autistic language, that is, private language that makes little or no sense to other people. Early communication takes place in the form of facial expressions and the sounding of various phonemes. Both are learned through imitation, and eventually gestures and speech sounds have the same meaning for the infant as they do for other people. This communication marks the beginning of syntaxic language and the end of infancy. Childhood. The era of childhood begins with the advent of syntaxic language and continues until the appearance of the need for playmates of an equal status. The age of childhood varies from culture to culture and from individual to individual, but in Western society it covers the period from about age 18 to 24 months until about age 5 or 6 years. During this stage, the mother remains the most significant other person, but her role is different from what it was in infancy. The dual personifications of mother are now fused into one, and the child's perception of the mother is more congruent with the real mother. Nevertheless, the good mother and bad mother personifications are usually retained on a parataxic level. In addition to combining the mother personifications, the child differentiates the various persons who previously formed the concept of the mothering one, separating mother and father and seeing each as having a distinct role. At about the same time, children are fusing the me personifications into a single self-dynamism. Once they establish syntaxic language, they can no longer consciously deal with the bad me and good me at the same time. Now they label behaviors as good or bad in imitation of their parents. However, these labels differ from the old personifications of infancy because they are symbolized on a syntaxic level and originate from children's behavior rather than from decreases or increases in their anxiety. Also, good and bad now imply social or moral value and no longer refer to the absence or presence of that painful tension called anxiety. During childhood, emotions become reciprocal. A child is able to give tenderness as well as receive it. The relationship between mother and child becomes more personal and less one-sided. Rather than seeing the mother as good or bad based on how she satisfied hunger needs, the child evaluates the mother syntaxically according to whether she shows reciprocal tender feelings, develops a relationship based on the mutual satisfaction of needs, or exhibits a rejecting attitude. Besides their parents, preschool-aged children often have one other significant relationship: an imaginary playmate. This eidetic friend enables children to have a safe, secure relationship that produces little anxiety. Parents sometimes observe their preschool-aged children talking to an imaginary friend, calling the friend by name, and possibly even insisting that an extra place be set at the table or space be made available in the car or the bed for this playmate. Also, many adults can recall their own childhood experiences with imaginary playmates. Sullivan insisted that having an imaginary playmate is not a sign of instability or pathology but a positive event that helps children become ready for intimacy with real friends during the pre-adolescence stage. These playmates offer children an opportunity to interact with another person who is safe and who will not increase their level of anxiety. This comfortable, non-threatening relationship with an imaginary playmate permits children to be more independent of parents and to make friends in later years. Sullivan referred to childhood as a period of rapid acculturation. Besides acquiring language, children learn cultural patterns of cleanliness, toilet training, eating habits, and sex role expectancies. They also learn two other important processes: dramatizations and preoccupations. Dramatizations are attempts to act like or sound like significant authority figures, especially mother and father. Preoccupations are strategies for avoiding anxiety and fear-provoking situations by remaining occupied with an activity that has earlier proved useful or rewarding. The malevolent attitude reaches a peak during the preschool years, giving some children an intense feeling of living in a hostile or enemy country. At the same time, children learn that society has placed certain restraints on their freedom. From these restrictions and from experiences with approval and disapprobation, children evolve their self-dynamism, which helps them handle anxiety and stabilize their personality. In fact, the self-system introduces so much stability that it makes future changes exceedingly difficult. Juvenile Era. The juvenile era begins with the appearance of the need for peers or playmates of equal status and ends when one finds a single chum to satisfy the need for intimacy. In the United States, the juvenile stage is roughly parallel to the first 3 years of school, beginning around ages 5 or 6 and ending at about age 8.5. It is interesting that Sullivan was so specific with the age at which this period ends and the pre-adolescent stage begins. Remember that Sullivan was 8.5 when he began an intimate relationship with a 13-year-old boy from a nearby farm. During the juvenile stage, Sullivan believed, a child should learn to compete, compromise, and cooperate. The degree of competition found among children of this, during the juvenile stage, children need to learn competition, cooperation, and compromise. Age varies with the culture, but Sullivan believed that people in the United States have generally overemphasized competition. Many children believe that they must be competitive to be successful. Compromise, too, can be overdone. A 7-year-old child who learns to continually give in to others is handicapped in the socialization process, and this yielding trait may continue to characterize the person in later life. Cooperation includes all those processes necessary to get along with others. The juvenile age child must learn to cooperate with others in the real world of interpersonal relationships. Cooperation is a critical step in becoming socialized and is the most important task confronting children during this stage of development. During the juvenile era, children associate with other children who are of equal standing. One-to-one relationships are rare, but if they exist, they are more likely to be based on convenience than on genuine intimacy. Boys and girls play with one another with little regard for the gender of the other person. Although permanent dyadic, two-person, relationships are still in the future, children of this age are beginning to make discriminations among themselves and to distinguish among adults. They see one teacher as kinder than another, one parent as more indulgent. The real world is coming more into focus, allowing them to operate increasingly on the syntaxic level. By the end of the juvenile stage, a child should have developed an orientation toward living that makes it easier to consistently handle anxiety, satisfy zonal and tenderness needs, and set goals based on memory and foresight. This orientation toward living readies a person for the deeper interpersonal relationships to follow. Pre-adolescence. Pre-adolescence, which begins at age 8.5 and ends with adolescence, is a time for intimacy with one particular person, usually a person of the same gender. All preceding stages have been egocentric, with friendships being formed on the basis of self-interest. A pre-adolescent, for the first time, takes a genuine interest in the other person. Sullivan called this process of becoming a social being the quiet miracle of pre-adolescence, a likely reference to the personality transformation he experienced during his own pre-adolescence. The outstanding characteristic of pre-adolescence is the genesis of the capacity to love. Previously, all interpersonal relationships were based on personal need satisfaction, but during pre-adolescence, intimacy and love become the essence of friendships. Intimacy involves a relationship in which the two partners consensually validate one another's personal worth. Love exists when the satisfaction or the security of another person becomes as significant to one as is one's own satisfaction or security. A pre-adolescence intimate relationship ordinarily involves another person of the same gender and of approximately the same age or social status. Infatuations with teachers or movie stars are not intimate relationships because they are not consensually validated. The significant relationships of this age are typically boy-boy or girl-girl chumships. To be liked by one's peers is more important to the pre-adolescent than to be liked by teachers or parents. Chums are able to freely express opinions and emotions to one another without fear of humiliation or embarrassment. This free exchange of personal thoughts and feelings initiates the pre-adolescent into the world of intimacy. Each chum becomes more fully human, acquires an expanded personality, and develops a wider interest in the humanity of all people. Sullivan believed that pre-adolescence is the most untroubled and carefree time of life. Parents are still significant, even though they have been repraised in a more realistic light. Pre-adolescents can experience unselfish love that has not yet been complicated by lust. The cooperation they acquired during the juvenile era evolves into collaboration or the capacity to work with another, not for self-prestige, but for the well-being of that other. Experiences during pre-adolescence are critical for the future development of personality. If children do not learn intimacy at this time, they are likely to be seriously stunted in later personality growth. However, earlier negative influences can be extenuated by the positive effects of an intimate relationship. Even the malevolent attitude can be reversed, and many other juvenile problems, such as loneliness and self-centeredness, are diminished by the achievement of intimacy. In other words, mistakes made during earlier stages of development can be overcome during pre-adolescence, but mistakes made during pre-adolescence are difficult to surmount during later stages. The relatively brief and uncomplicated period of pre-adolescence is shattered by the onset of puberty. Early adolescence. Early adolescence begins with puberty and ends with the need for sexual love with one person. It is marked by the eruption of genital interest and the advent of lustful relationships. In the United States, early adolescence is generally parallel with the middle school years. As with most other stages, however, Sullivan placed no great emphasis on chronological age. The need for intimacy achieved during the preceding stage continues during early adolescence, but is now accompanied by a parallel but separate need lust. In addition, security, or the need to be free from anxiety, remains active during early adolescence. Thus, intimacy, lust, and security often collide with one another, bringing stress and conflict to the young adolescent in at least three ways. First, lust interferes with security operations because genital activity in American culture is frequently ingrained with anxiety, guilt, and embarrassment. Second, intimacy also can threaten security, as when young adolescents seek intimate friendships with other gender adolescents. These attempts are fraught with self-doubt, uncertainty, and ridicule from others, which may lead to loss of self-esteem and an increase in anxiety. Third, intimacy and lust are frequently in conflict during early adolescence. Although intimate friendships with peers of equal status are still important, powerful genital tensions seek outlet without regard for the intimacy need. Therefore, young adolescents may retain their intimate friendships from pre-adolescence while feeling lust for people they neither like nor even know. Because the lust dynamism is biological, it bursts forth at puberty regardless of the individual's interpersonal readiness for it. A boy with no previous experience with intimacy may see girls as sex objects, while having no real interest in them. An early adolescent girl may sexually tease boys but lack the ability to relate to them on an intimate level. The early adolescent's search for intimacy can increase anxiety and threaten security. Sullivan believed that early adolescence is a turning point in personality development. The person either emerges from this stage in command of the intimacy and lust dynamisms or faces serious interpersonal difficulties during future stages. Although sexual adjustment is important to personality development, Sullivan felt that the real issue lies in getting along with other people. Late adolescence. Late adolescence begins when young people are able to feel both lust and intimacy toward the same person, and it ends in adulthood when they establish a lasting love relationship. Late adolescence embraces that period of self-discovery when adolescents are determining their preferences in genital behavior, usually during secondary school years, or about ages 15 to 17 or 18. The outstanding feature of late adolescence is the fusion of intimacy and lust. The troubled attempts at self-exploration of early adolescence evolve into a stable pattern of sexual activity in which the loved one is also the object of lustful interest. People of the other gender are no longer desired solely as sex objects but as people who are capable of being loved non-selfishly. Unlike the previous stage that was ushered in by biological changes, late adolescence is completely determined by interpersonal relations. Successful late adolescence includes a growing syntaxic mode. At college or in the workplace, late adolescents begin exchanging ideas with others and having their opinions and beliefs either validated or repudiated. They learn from others how to live in the adult world, but a successful journey through the earlier stages facilitates this adjustment. If previous developmental epochs were unsuccessful, young people come to late adolescence with no intimate interpersonal relations, inconsistent patterns of sexual activity, and a great need to maintain security operations. They rely heavily on the parataxic mode to avoid anxiety and strive to preserve self-esteem through selective inattention, dissociation, and neurotic symptoms. They face serious problems in bridging the gulf between society's expectations and their own inability to form intimate relations with persons of the other gender. Believing that love is a universal condition of young people, they are often pressured during late adolescence. Young people feel both lust and intimacy toward one other person, into falling in love. However, only the mature person has the capacity to love. Others merely go through the motions of being in love in order to maintain security. Adulthood. The successful completion of late adolescence culminates in adulthood, a period when people can establish a love relationship with at least one significant other person. Writing of this love relationship, Sullivan stated that this really highly developed intimacy with another is not the principal business of life, but is, perhaps, the principal source of satisfaction in life. Sullivan had little to say about this final stage because he believed that mature adulthood was beyond the scope of interpersonal psychiatry. People who have achieved the capacity to love are not in need of psychiatric counsel. His sketch of the mature person, therefore, was not founded on clinical experience but was an extrapolation from the preceding stages. Mature adults are perceptive of other people's anxiety, needs, and security. They operate predominantly on the syntaxic level, and find life interesting and exciting.